Hey everyone, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Oh, and don't forget to ring that bell icon so you never miss another one of our deep dives. Today we're going to be tackling something that's really important for anyone who's interested in international relations, especially if you're maybe a UPSC aspirant or even just curious about how the global economy really works.
Yeah,
We're talking about the World Trade Organization.
that's right. We are going way beyond just the headlines today. We're going to really break down the WTO's achievements, the hurdles that it faces, even take a little peek into the future,
Right.
all in a way that's clear and engaging, even if you're totally new to this whole world of international trade.
Okay, so let's start with the basics then.
Mm.
What exactly is this thing, the WTO? What's its origin story?
Okay, well, picture this. It's 1995, and the world is kind of realizing that this mishmash of all these individual trade rules that are out there, they're just not cutting it.
Yeah.
Enter the WTO, born from kind of the ashes of this older GANT agreement, to become like the global referee for trade. Making sure that there's fairness and that things are kind of sailing smoothly for everyone involved.
So it's like a global trade club kind of, with like a rule book that everyone agrees to.
Yeah, exactly. And it's headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland.
Fancy.
It boasts now a whopping 164 member countries,
Oh,
including India as a founding member.
okay.
The goal? To really grease the wheels of international trade, encourage countries to lower those pesky trade barriers,
Right.
and perhaps most importantly, provide a platform for settling disputes peacefully.
Yeah, no one wants a trade war.
Exactly.
Okay, so how does the WTO actually make all of this happen? Does it have like a secret weapon or something?
Well, not so secret, but it does operate on some key principles.
Okay.
And one of the most important is non-discrimination.
Hmm.
This means every member gets treated equally, thanks to the most favored nation rule.
Okay.
No special favors for anyone, which keeps things fair and square.
So if one country gets a sweet deal on importing, let's say, coffee beans,
Right.
everyone else gets that same deal. No one's missing out.
Precisely. And then there's this idea of national treatment, meaning foreign products, they get treated the same as local ones within a country.
Hmm.
This prevents unfair advantages and helps create a level playing field.
So whether it's a phone made in India or one made overseas, they should be treated equally in the Indian market.
Exactly. Now, the WTO isn't all just these kind of lofty principles and ideas.
Right.
It has real teeth in the form of agreements.
Oh, right. We mentioned those earlier.
Yeah.
What are some of the major agreements that really kind of shape how global trade actually works?
Well, there are several, but let's highlight a few key ones.
Okay.
One that frequently grabs the headlines is the Agreement on Agriculture,
Okay.
or AOA for short. Its aim is to really make agricultural trade fairer and more market-driven, but, still allow countries to support their farmers in a way that doesn't unfairly disadvantage others.
So no flooding the market with super cheap subsidized wheat and undercutting farmers in other countries.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
Another big one is TRIP S, the Agreement on Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights.
Okay.
And this sets the ground rules for patents, copyrights, trademarks, ensuring that innovation is protected even across borders.
So if an Indian scientist develops a life-saving drug, their invention is protected even if it's manufactured somewhere else.
Exactly. It incentivizes creativity and investment on a global scale.
Wow.
Then we have agreements on things like sanitary and phytosanitary measures.
Okay.
Think food safety,
Yep.
technical barriers to trade-related investment measures. It's this whole framework designed to ensure that trade is not just free,
Right.
but also fair and predictable.
That sounds incredibly comprehensive, I have to say. But the world is constantly changing. How does the WTO adapt to new challenges, like the rise of e-commerce or concerns about climate change?
Okay, well, that's where the ministerial conferences come in.
Okay.
These are massive gatherings held every few years where member countries get together to review the progress, discuss emerging challenges, and sometimes even negotiate new agreements.
So it's like a global trade summit, where everyone's trying to find common ground in this constantly evolving landscape.
Precisely. One famous example is the 2001 Doha Round,
Okay.
which aimed to address a lot of the issues faced by developing countries in the global trading system. Though it didn't achieve everything it set out to do, it did bring to light the need for a more inclusive and development-focused approach to trade, which is particularly relevant for a country like India.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of disagreements, what happens when countries have these differing viewpoints on a trade issue? Does it just descend into chaos with everyone doing their own thing?
Not at all. The WTO has this unique dispute settlement system, often called the Supreme Court of Trade.
Okay.
It helps to resolve these conflicts peacefully, through a legal process where countries can air their grievances and get a ruling based on the WTO agreements.
So it's like a neutral judge stepping in
Yeah.
to mediate these trade spats and keep things from really escalating.
Yes. And it's considered one of the most effective dispute settlement systems in international law. It's helped to prevent countless trade wars and maintain that level playing field for all members.
That sounds crucial,
Uh-huh.
especially for a country like India, which is actively engaged in global trade and has its own set of interests to protect. Can you give us like a real-world example of how this dispute system actually plays out?
Of course. Let's look at a situation involving the USA and India at the WTO. Two economic giants who have had their share of disagreements.
Right.
There have been several instances where they've locked horns over trade issues, and the WTO has played a key role in finding resolutions.
So even major players have to play by the rules. Can't
Yeah.
just throw their weight around.
Exactly. For instance, India recently won a trade dispute against the U.S. regarding subsidies provided by some American states in the energy sector.
Okay.
The WTO ruled that these subsidies were inconsistent with the trade rules and gave India the right to retaliate with countermeasures.
Wow, so this system actually has teeth. But does it always work this smoothly?
Well, as you can imagine, no system is perfect. And the WTO, despite its achievements, faces its own set of challenges and criticisms. And that's something we'll delve into after a quick break.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
We've been unpacking the WTO, its goals, principles, how it actually operates. But as with any global system, there are bound to be some bumps in the road, right?
Absolutely. The WTO, for all its successes, it has faced its share of criticisms and challenges over the years.
Right.
One of the biggest criticisms is that it sometimes favors developed countries at the expense of developing ones.
Okay.
The rules, while seemingly neutral on the surface,
Right.
can sometimes disadvantage nations that are still trying to catch up economically.
So it's like playing a game where the rule book was written by the teams that are already ahead. How does that play out in the real world?
Think about agricultural subsidies, for example.
Right.
Developed countries often provide substantial financial support to their farmers, allowing them to produce and export goods at lower prices.
Right.
Developing countries argue that this creates an uneven playing field, making it difficult for their own farmers to compete in the global market.
It's like running a race where one runner has a head start in a pair of rocket-powered shoes.
Yeah.
It's hard to call that a fair competition.
Exactly. Another challenge the WTO faces is the difficulty of reaching new agreements.
Right.
Getting 164 countries with diverse economies, political systems, priorities to agree on these complex trade rules, it's a monumental task.
I imagine it's like trying to herd cats with everyone pulling in different directions.
Yeah.
How does the WTO even function with that level of complexity?
Well, it requires a lot of diplomacy, compromise, and a willingness to find common ground.
Yeah.
But the downside is that it can make the process incredibly slow
Right.
and sometimes lead to deadlock.
Okay.
As a result, the WTO's rulebook hasn't always kept pace with the rapidly changing dynamics of global trade.
That makes sense. The world doesn't stand still, and new issues keep popping up.
What are some of the areas where the WTO seems to be lagging behind? Take the digital economy, for instance. E-commerce, cross-border data flows, online platforms. These are all massive parts of the global economy now, but the WTO's existing agreements don't adequately address these areas.
Okay.
This has created a kind of gray zone where the rules are unclear, leading to uncertainty and potential for disputes.
It's like trying to navigate a new city with an outdated map.
Yeah.
You might eventually find your way, but it's going to be a lot more confusing and potentially lead to wrong turns.
Precisely. And then we have a criticisms directed at the appellate body, which we discussed earlier.
Oh, right.
It's meant to be the final arbiter of trade disputes, the highest court of appeal.
Okay.
But in recent years, it has faced significant challenges, particularly due to actions taken by the United States.
Hold on, remind me again what exactly appedes the appellate body. Why is it so important?
Think of it as the Supreme Court for global trade.
Okay.
When countries disagree on the interpretation or application of WTO rules, they can bring their case to the dispute settlement system.
Right.
And the appellate body is the final stage of appeal.
Okay.
It's essential for ensuring that the rules are upheld consistently and that the system remains fair and effective.
So it's the ultimate guardian of the rule book, making sure everyone's playing by the same set of standards.
Exactly. But the U.S. has been blocking the appointment of new judges to the appellate body, effectively crippling its ability to function.
Wow.
This has caused a major backlog of cases and undermined the WTO's ability to resolve disputes effectively.
That's a pretty significant blow to the whole system. Why would the U.S. take such drastic action?
Well, the U.S. argues that the appellate body has overstepped its mandate
Okay.
and made rulings that go beyond the scope of the WTO agreements.
Hmm.
They claim it has engaged in judicial activism, creating new obligations for member countries that were never agreed upon.
So it's a power struggle over who gets to define the rules and how they're interpreted.
In a sense, yes. And it's created a major rift within the WTO, with many countries expressing concern that this could unravel the entire dispute settlement system and undermine the organization's legitimacy.
That sounds pretty dire. If the mechanism for resolving disputes breaks down, what's to stop countries from just ignoring the rules and going their own way?
It's a valid concern, and it's one of the biggest challenges that the WTO faces today.
Yeah.
The dispute settlement system was considered one of its crown jewels,
Right.
a shining example of how international cooperation could work.
Yeah.
But now its future is in doubt, and the implications for global trade are significant.
This is all pretty heavy stuff. Is there any light at the end of the tunnel? Is there a path forward for the WTO to overcome these challenges and remain relevant in the 21st century?
Well, there's no easy fix, but there are certainly ideas and initiatives being discussed. One approach is to update the WTO's rulebook
Okay.
to reflect the realities of the modern global economy.
So it's like giving the operating system an upgrade to handle the demands of new apps and software.
Exactly. New agreements are needed to cover things like e-commerce data flows, digital trade. There's also a growing recognition that the WTO needs to do more to address issues like climate change, sustainable development, and labor rights.
So it's not just about trade for trade's sake anymore. It's about ensuring that trade contributes to a more sustainable and equitable global future.
Precisely. And then there's the question of reform within the WTO itself.
What kind of reforms are we talking about?
Well, for one, there are calls to make the organization more efficient and transparent,
Okay.
to streamline its decision-making processes,
Right.
and ensure that all members have a voice, regardless of their size or economic clout.
So giving more power to developing countries like India, who often feel marginalized in the current system.
That's one aspect of it. There are also proposals to reform the dispute settlement system,
Right.
either by addressing the concerns raised by the U.S. or by finding alternative mechanisms for resolving trade conflicts.
It sounds like the WTO is at a crossroads. What happens next will depend on the choices made by its member countries and their willingness to work together to find solutions.
Exactly. And speaking of member countries, let's turn our attention to India.
Okay.
As a founding member and a major player in global trade, India has a crucial role to play in shaping the future of the WTO.
That's a great point. We've talked about the WTO in general, but now I'm really curious to hear about India's specific perspective and how it's navigating these challenges. Okay, so we're back, and now it's time to really turn our attention to India's role in all of this.
Right.
It's a founding member of the WTO, obviously a major player in the global economy,
Absolutely.
and it stands on WTO reforms. It carries a lot of weight, I would imagine.
Absolutely. India's in this fascinating position. On one hand, it benefits greatly from a rules-based trading system. The WTO provides that predictability and access to global markets,
Right.
which is crucial for a country with ambitions of becoming a global economic powerhouse.
Yeah, so India has a strong interest in upholding the system
Right.
and making sure that it actually works effectively.
Precisely. But on the other hand, India is also a champion for developing countries, advocating for a more inclusive and equitable WTO that takes into account the specific needs and concerns of nations that are still developing.
So it's walking a tightrope, trying to balance its own interests with this leadership role in the developing world. How does India juggle those competing priorities?
It's a delicate balancing act.
Yeah.
And you see this reflected in India's stance on various WTO issues. For example, India has been very vocal about the need to reform agricultural subsidies.
Okay.
It argues that the current system, which allows developed countries to provide those large subsidies to their farmers,
Yeah.
it distorts global markets and hurts farmers in developing nations.
Right, that makes sense, given that agriculture is still such a vital sector for India's economy
Yeah,
and employs a significant portion of its population.
exactly. And this isn't just about protecting Indian farmers. It's about advocating for a fair system that allows developing countries to compete on a level playing field.
Right.
India has also been pushing for more flexibility in WTO rules, especially when it comes to intellectual property rights and access to essential medicines.
Yeah, this is a huge issue, not just for India, but for many developing countries.
Yeah.
How does the WTO impact access to affordable medicines?
Well, the WTO's TRIPS agreement, which we talked about earlier,
Right.
it sets global standards for protecting intellectual property,
Oh, yeah.
including patents on medicines.
Mhm.
While this is important for encouraging innovation,
Right.
it can also make life-saving drugs prohibitively expensive for countries with limited resources.
So the balancing act between incentivizing the development of new medicines while ensuring that people in developing countries can actually afford them. How is India trying to navigate this?
Well, India has been advocating for flexibilities within the TRIPS agreement
Okay.
that would allow countries to produce or import generic versions of essential medicines in certain situations,
Hmm.
such as public health emergencies.
Right.
It's about ensuring that people's health needs are prioritized alongside commercial interests.
That's a crucial point. It highlights the human dimension of these trade agreements. They're not just about abstract rules, they have real-world consequences for people's lives.
Absolutely. And India's stance on these issues resonates with many other developing countries, giving it a strong voice in pushing for reforms within the WTO.
Mm.
But India isn't just focused on specific issues like agriculture or intellectual property.
Well,
It's also concerned about the broader direction the WTO is heading in.
what do you mean by that? What are some of India's broader concerns?
Well, India is worried about the rise of protectionism and unilateralism,
Okay.
particularly in the wake of the U.S.-China trade war. It believes that a strong and effective WTO is crucial for maintaining a stable and predictable trading system that benefits everyone.
So in a world where countries are increasingly tempted to go it alone and put their own interests first,
Right.
India is advocating for a more cooperative and multilateral approach to trade.
Exactly. India sees the WTO as a vital forum for dialogue, negotiation, and dispute resolution. It believes that by working together, countries can find solutions that address common challenges and create a more prosperous and equitable global trading system.
That's a powerful message, and it seems particularly relevant today as we're witnessing these growing tensions and divisions on the global stage.
Yeah.
But it's one thing to advocate for change, it's another to actually make it happen. What are some concrete steps that India can take to really push for these reforms within the WTO?
Well, one strategy is to build alliances with other developing countries.
Okay.
There's strength in numbers,
Right.
and by working together, they can amplify their voices and exert greater influence in WTO negotiations.
It's forming a united front to push for changes that benefit the developing world.
Exactly.
Right.
India can also leverage its position as a major economy and trading partner to push for reforms. By engaging in constructive dialogue and demonstrating its commitment to a rules-based trading system, it can encourage other countries to do the same.
So leading by example and using its economic clout to kind of shape the direction of the WTO.
Precisely. And finally, India needs to be proactive in shaping the agenda of the WTO.
Right.
This means actively participating in ongoing discussions, proposing new ideas, and working to find solutions that address the challenges of the 21st century.
So not just reacting to events, but actively shaping the future of global trade.
Absolutely. The WTO is at a crossroads, and India has a critical role to play in shaping its future. By advocating for a more inclusive, equitable, and effective organization, it can help ensure that global trade benefits everyone, not just a select few.
This has been a truly fascinating deep dive, I have to say, into the World Trade Organization, its achievements, its challenges, and the really crucial role that India plays in shaping its future. I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
What are some key takeaways you hope our listeners will walk away with?
For me, the biggest takeaway is that the WTO is this vital institution for managing global trade, but it's not perfect.
Right.
It faces serious challenges, from rising protectionism to the need to adapt to the digital age. And its future really depends on the willingness of its members, especially key players like India, to work together to find solutions.
Absolutely. And for those of you listening who are interested in international relations or preparing for the UPSC exams, remember that understanding the WTO and its impact on India is crucial. Yeah. It's a complex topic, but hopefully this deep dive has provided you with at least a solid foundation.
I agree. And remember, the world of international trade is constantly evolving.
Right.
So stay informed, stay engaged, and keep learning.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the World Trade Organization.
My pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring.